Hi everyone, so for this prompt I am going to be talking about yellow journalism. So to begin, what is yellow journalism? Yellow journalism is the reporting of sensationalized and fabricated news, these exaggerated claims to evoke emotions. So really the first time we saw yellow journalism and the term yellow journalism used was seen in print with Irvin Wardman's New York Press in 1897. So these features of yellow journalism are listed out on page 241 in our textbook under the section of yellow journalism. So I'm just going to go through these quickly. So they include multi-column headlines that sometimes stretched across the front page. They included generous and imaginative use of illustrations. They had bold and experimental layouts. They had a penchant for self-promotion. They had a tendency to rely on anonymous sources. And lastly, they were an activist ethos. So this kind of tells us exactly what this yellow journalism was featuring. So the first time, or two prominent journalists we saw that really used this yellow journalism was William Randolph Hearst in his New York Journal and Joseph Pulitzer of the New York World. So these were both great examples of newspapers that used a number of sensationalized techniques to sell millions of newspapers. So this term yellow journalism arose during the period of the Spanish-American War. This is when it really became popular. Like I said, this is known as the beginning of yellow journalism. This war was the aftermath of the rebellion in Cuba against Spanish rule. So newspapers got a hold of what was going on over there, and there were reports of citizens crowded into camps, and many of them dying because of diseases. So both Pulitzer and Hearst understood that this war with Cuba would not only sell their papers, but would make them into a position of this national importance, this, it'd make their newspaper popular. So this led to circulation wars between both of them. So first from Cuba, Hearst sent over his journalist, and they wrote stories designed to really tug at the heartstrings of Americans. They described these horrific tales of what was going on in Cuba, such as female prisoners, executions, these violent rebels fighting, and starving women and children. These are just a few of the reports or the claims that they made that filled their newspapers. So Hearst and Pulitzer both, in a sense, made their stories credible by using false names, dates, and locations of battles of this and outrageous behavior that was committed by the Spanish. Obviously, this wasn't true, but many people believed it. And then this use of yellow journalism and how it was provoking a war was seen by when Hearst on page 243 of our textbook says, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." This is explaining just exactly what yellow journalism is. So, however, Hearst got his big story with the sinking of the battleship Maine in Havana Harbor. And so this prompted war from citizens. After the sinking of the Maine, Hearst newspapers, with no evidence, blamed the Spanish, and soon U.S. public opinion demanded intervention. They demanded a war. So this is why many people think that the press is what have forced the United States in a war with Spain. However, in our textbook, author Sloan, he mentions that the press was not solely to blame for the propelling of the United States in the war. So, yellow journalism reached its peak during and right after the war. This is because the flashiness and the credibility of the genre was not easy to sustain because of competitors and muckrackers exposing the misconduct of these newspapers. So today, we do still see examples of yellow journalism. One of the ways we see this most is in tabloids. You know, we see this when we're checking out the grocery store. We see these magazines with these ridiculous titles that none of us would really believe, because we know this is tabloids. So these tabloid papers that use the sensationalism and scandal ploys, which started representing the term tabloids, and eventually became linked to yellow journalism tactics. So one example that happened a few years ago, I believe in 2012, was the headline of "This baby was snatched by an eagle." The news was everywhere. However, when the video was released of this, it was actually false. So that is just one example of yellow journalism.